Hello, it's Bettina Arndt with a live streaming Q&A all about sex-starved husbands. We posted a vlog on Sunday all about this and got such a lot of response, so many questions, so many comments from you guys that we thought it'd be really interesting to give you the opportunity to have a bit of chat with us about some of these issues. I've actually got a whole lot of comments that have come in over the last few days that I thought I'd start off with, and then if you'd like to join in and send your comments in, you're very welcome to do that. So I want to start off with a comment from Gary, who said, sex doesn't have to be a big deal, I agree. But when a husband goes for months without sex, it becomes a big deal and then resentment kicks in. And that's really the point. The trouble with sex is, it shouldn't be a big deal. If sex is good, it needn't consume your life. It's a very minor part of a good relationship, for most of us, I think. But if sex is causing problems and causing tension between the couple, then it is an enormous deal, because you go to bed every night together. And it really is the elephant in the room. I've talked to so many women who talk about that business of getting ready for bed and wondering whether whether the hand will come creeping towards them in the middle of the night. He's looking at her, he's wondering, he's cooking the dinner for her, wondering if he's going to get the green light today. It's all that sort of interaction. And for people who are in a situation where there's mismatched desire, where they're not communicating well about this issue, this is an enormous source of tension, and it can really eat away at a relationship and cause an enormous resentment. What really surprises me about men, I suppose, is that they're not more resentful than they are. They should, we have a situation where lots and lots of men are in relationships where they're getting very little sex, or getting sex doled out to them very occasionally and sometimes reluctantly, and yet they're still up for it. The fact that they will pop up and get slapped away and knocked down, and they ask and they try and they try. One man said to me, every 10 times I might be lucky, and there he was like some sort of little Cupid doll, constantly being slapped off, and he was still resilient and still coping with that situation. I find that really extraordinary. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what it's like for women to be in that situation. Believe me, it's very different. Now, a woman called Jo talks about with an issue of that women don't go off sex, they go off their husbands. She says she still wants sex, but just not with you. And it's an interesting point. There's a woman, a professor in Melbourne, who did research on menopausal women and asking them about their sex drive. And that's one of the things she actually found, that many women reported not being remotely interested in sex in their relationships, in their marriages. But if the marriage broke up and they found themselves single again, then magically their whole sex drive re-emerged. And of course, that's a really infuriating thing for an ex-husband. The number of men have written to me and said, I can't believe it. Some people are still relatively friendly in those circumstances, and sometimes they'll know about her regaining her sexual interest. And how frustrating that is for a man who's been in that situation with a woman who wasn't interested for many, many years. That's one of the fascinating things here. I once heard from this man who was complaining to me that his wife had gone on this drug. It's actually a drug called Livial, which is women usually take post-menopause. It's a combination of testosterone and estrogen, and actually can boost libido. It certainly can help with vaginal dryness and that sort of issue. But in this case, she took it for various postmenopausal problems, and it caused an enormous boost to her sexual desire. And he complained bitterly and claimed it was all the drug. Well, it actually happened that she went off and had an affair with a next door neighbour, and her whole demeanour changed. She started becoming really sexual and having Brazilians and so on. I think it was actually probably the next door neighbour who was causing a lot of the changes rather than necessarily the drug, but he blamed it all on this drug. But it was an interesting thing that it is certainly true that many women who are single have a much stronger sexual drive than when they're in their long-term relationship. I see a big difference between mating in captivity and mating so mating in captivity is a domestic situation, and mating in the wild is a situation of being single and being out there and meeting new people. And many women have strong sexual drives in that situation, but when they get into long-term relationships, everything starts to change. Now, I had a lot of questions about what about the sex-starved wives. Maria says it's a two-way street. There are just as many sex-starved married women as married men, I'm sure. It's actually not true. All the big surveys show real different there. Quite a lot of surveys show a majority of women experience at least periods or a long-term low sexual interest, low sexual desire. We had a bigger survey in Australia of over 20,000 people, and 55% of women said they experienced low desire. Now, most of the surveys show about 15% of males will say they have low desire, so it's much, much lower. Haley says, "Sigh, I'm a married, sex-starved woman. My husband's just not interested. He's gay. He's not gay or having an affair. He describes himself as asexual. If it wasn't for the kids, I'd be out of here." I mean, there are certainly men who are asexual, if you like, who have very low interest in sex throughout their lives. It's just never one of the things that really captures them. And there are the men who start off with a strong sexual interest and then lose it, just as many women do. And there can be a whole range of health issues, a whole range of problems that can cause men to lose interest in sex. It's just that that's much less common than it is for women. And Natasha says, "I was with a man who never wanted sex, and it was a real eye-opener for me as I realised how undesirable a partner can feel if they're constantly being knocked back. I'm much more understanding in relationships now when it comes to sex. It's not nice being constantly rejected." And I suppose that's the point I talk about a lot, is the fact that it's the rejection that really eats men up. This sense of never feeling wanted, this sense of never having his woman interested in going to bed with him. That's a very difficult thing to sustain for many men. Now, the fascinating thing is when I was doing my research, when I had this group of people who were keeping diaries for me about how they negotiate sex in their relationship. 98 couples kept diaries for up to a year. In that group of 98 couples, about 10% were the women who wanted sex more than their partners. And they were a fascinating group. And one of the things that really struck me about them is how they struggled with the rejection in that situation. As I think Natasha said, I mean, women don't expect to be in that situation. Most women have been in relationships where they've got men constantly all over them wanting sex all the time. And to suddenly be with a man who's not interested in you is really grueling for many women. Women will tell me, I felt so undesirable. I wondered whether he was having an affair. I thought, he doesn't regard me as attractive anymore. And particularly when they're surrounded by women who are, have sex-hungry husbands who are really always seeking sex. And what was interesting for me is that amongst those 10 women, I think about 4 out of the 10 broke up the relationship during the period they were writing for me, because they couldn't cope with that sense of constantly being rejected. Now, I got a lot of questions also about housework. Does doing the laundry get you laid? There's been so much research about this, and endless studies come out which usually say that the more housework that men do, the more sex they get. Although I noticed there was one study the other day that said quite the opposite, that men could do a lot of housework and still not get much sex, and in fact that some men who did a lot of housework got even less sex. And it's interesting. It's not as interesting to speculate on what might be going on there. I mean, one of the interesting things that emerges if you look at what attracts women to men, when do women feel that men are being sexy? I mean, yes, some women get turned on by the man, pushing the hoover around or doing the vacuuming or putting on laundry or whatever it is. And part of that is just the issue of being with a man who's considering your needs. I mean, if you're working hard and you come home tired and you have a husband who's just sitting there while you're struggling to cook dinner for the kids or whatever it is, naturally you're going to feel resentful and you're fairly unlikely to want to hop into bed with him. One of the things that I was really heartened by in the response to this discussion was the fact we got a lot of comments from women who said they get what we're talking about. And my heart goes out to men these days. Ali says, I've been with my husband for 16 years and I still find him attractive. I enjoy being with him and we have a lot of fun together. Why get married if you're going to end up in the friend zone? Women who make no effort are just ripping themselves off and will end up alone. Her point about the friend zone is really important because men say to me, I don't want to live with my sister. Don't want to live with a roommate. I expected a lover, at least an occasional lover, to be part of my married life. And without that, men feel there's an enormous gap in their relationships. But Ali's point about women who make no effort are going to end up alone isn't necessarily true. I mean, one of the things that's really struck me looking at this issue is the fact that so many men are willing to hang in there. And it's mainly, I think, because they know the enormous cost of walking away from that relationship. We have a situation in Australia now where it's very, very, very easy for men to end up losing contact with their children after divorce or being in a situation where they really struggle to have any sort of normal relationship with their kids after they separate. They risk losing a lot of the material wealth, the house, the things they've worked for many years, and having to start again totally. I mean, there's a lot at stake for men here. And I think it's not surprising that men hang in sexless marriages, in largely celibate marriages, because the costs are too high when it comes to leaving. And yet there are a lot of miserable men out there who feel their needs are not being taken into account. Arthur says she's implicitly saying that women don't like sex as much as men think they do. This is not the issue. There's an issue between how much we enjoy sex when we have it and how much we want sex. I have known plenty of women who love sex when they have it. I've had women who say to me, I really enjoy it when we do it. I can't understand why we don't do it more often. But they're just caught up in this idea that they can't have sex unless they have prior desire. And that's what gets us into trouble, this notion that desire must come first before we can enjoy sex. And I've talked about the fact in my vlog about all of this, I talked about the fact that we didn't always think like that. When I was being trained as a sex therapist over 40 years ago now, we were taught that desire had to come first. Famous sex researchers, Masters and Johnson, had these different stages of sexual arousal. And you had to have, for women, you had to have desire before you led to arousal and orgasm and plateau and so on. Desire came first. And that's what we thought for many, many years. And it's only recently that the research has come through showing that's not necessarily the case. There are lots of women who don't have spontaneous desire. But if they start making love and they're in a situation with a man who knows how to make love to them properly, and they can get their head in the right place, and that's the important thing. Lots of women don't want to anticipate pleasure. They don't like the idea that they should have sex without prior desire, and therefore they never work on this notion of thinking through and getting their head preparing for the fact that they'll start experiencing pleasure when they get going. And so sex simply never happens. Georgia, who says, sex is no longer part of the wifely duty. Her body, her choice. If she doesn't feel like it, it's not her duty to service her husband. He has a hand, she says. Isn't that lovely? And the notion that he can just go and wank, he can go and masturbate, what's the big deal? Men aren't stupid. Men know they can masturbate. And this has never been about men getting their rocks off. Every man knows it's far easier to use his hand than to try to persuade his wife or most women to make love to him. I mean, it's just not any comparison there. It's never been about sexual relief for men. Men talk at length to me about what sex actually means. And it's about connection. It's about having, sex gives men that sense of closeness and intimacy that they get in no other way. And that's one of the things we often hear as a difference between men and women, that women need to feel close in order to want sex. And for men, they have to have that, experience that closeness first. They have to have sex in order to experience that closeness. It's sex that actually gives that to them. And without any intimacy in their relationship, it creates this enormous hole in terms of expression of love and closeness within that relationship. And then I suppose the other flip side of that is it's also about living in a relationship where you never feel wanted, where you feel your partner is never interested in catering to your needs, in caring for you, or in being concerned about what really matters to you. And that's not much fun. So a hand doesn't give you any of that. Well, our comments seem to be drying up, so maybe we'll call that a night. I'm very happy to hear from you, and if you'd like to write to me and talk to me about these issues, I'm always fascinated to hear what's going on out there. I'd love to hear from women as well. As I said, I was really excited to hear from so many women who agree with me that, you know, sex is in one area where men are not getting fair treatment. We need to gang together, women, and try to persuade other women to rethink this whole issue. I'm making a whole lot of vlogs. I'm just started vlogging and putting them up on YouTube, and the one I put up on Sunday is my big vlog, my big juicy vlog, all about sex-starved men. I'm going on to make a whole lot of other vlogs about other issues I'm really passionate about, mainly about men's issues. That's what I've decided to really devote my time to from now on. Domestic violence, what's happening in the family court, what's happening in marriages, a whole range of issues. So I hope you'll have a look at my YouTube vlogs that are starting to appear now, and thank you very much for joining me tonight.